much for having me invited to this conference. I think it's very important because the issues industrial democracy and to find solutions for really catastrophic situations is very important. I was asked to give you a more general overview concerning the European crisis and the possibilities of an alternative economic policy. I will do that, I'll try to do that. And of course the current political debate in Europe is now dominated by the Greece case. The main subject in European policy is the negotiation between representatives of the European Union, of the European institutions, and the new Greek government. The new Greek government led by Alexis Tsipras, the leader of Syriza, and Syriza has won the elections at the end of January of this year. There are really very hard and difficult negotiations about the Greek debt and how to deal with that debt. Greece, if you know, certainly, as you know, Greece is one of the most affected European countries by the European crisis. In consequence, they have a huge public debt which has not been reduced after having applied the measures required by the so-called Troika. The so-called Troika, that's a group composed by the European Commission, by the European Central Bank, and by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. On the contrary, the debt in Greece increased significantly. They had a debt of 120% at the beginning of the GDP, of the gross domestic product, at the beginning of the crisis in 2008, and now they have a debt of 170% concerning the GDP, the gross domestic product. And the new Greek government is not willing anymore to fulfill the so-called memorandum the former Greek governments signed with the Troika. This memorandum commits the Greek government to severe cuts in public expenditures and as a condition to get European money, but causing dramatic social consequences and a real humanitarian crisis. Therefore, I think it's correct, Tsipras does not accept those conditions anymore. In addition, it has to be taken into account that this money coming from the European Union wasn't used to improve the living conditions of the Greek people, but to save the highly indebted banks. But the European institutions and the majority of the European governments, unfortunately in particular the German government, insist on fulfilling the memorandum signed by the former Greek governments. Hence, the negotiations are so difficult. Although both parts came a little bit closer during the negotiations, there is no solution in sight. The Greek government only gained some time, a breathing space, to elaborate new proposals for a so-called reform program. I refer to the Greece case not only because it's actual, it's currently one of the dominant subjects of European politics, but I think it's emblematic of the whole difficulty to face the European crisis. In the center of attention is actually the question how to deal with the debt, but the main question concerns the concept of the economic and social policy as a whole. There are two fundamentally different concepts of economic policy. On the one hand, the neoliberal approach of the Troika and the majority of the European governments, with the politics of privatization, liberalization and deregulation, entrusting the economic development to the market. On the other hand, an economic policy which focuses on the public and intends an active role of the state. The dominant European neoliberal economic policy is austerity policy, which cuts off salaries and public expenditure, worsening the working and living conditions. In many countries, not only in Greece, but also in Spain, for example, workers' and trade unions' rights have been dismantled. The crucial element of this policy is the so-called fiscal compact, which oblige member states to introduce deficit limits into national law. This neoliberal austerity policy pursued by the Troika and requested in particular, as I said it before, by the German government, which wants to oblige all other members of the European Union to implement a so-called pact of competition, caused not only devastating social consequences, but was also counterproductive for the economic development. Once again, very emblematic is the development in Greece, because in Greece the GDP, the gross domestic product, was reduced since 2008 by around 25%. They lost a lot of their economic performance. Also in many other countries there was a considerable reduction of the GDP since 2007, since 2008, when the GDP reached its peak. So it was the case in Italy, with a reduction of about 9%, in Cyprus more than 10%, in Portugal 6.6%, and in Croatia more than 12%, 12.6%. Although there was a remarkable growth in some European countries, in particular in Poland, with a growth of nearly 19%, and if we are looking to the north of Europe, we have a remarkable growth in Sweden, it's about 6%. Also, there is a remarkable growth in some countries in Europe. The situation in the European Union is characterized by stagnation and not by growth. There is nearly no growth compared to the years 2007 and 2008, and last year as well, growth was very weak. On the other hand, there are still high unemployment rates, more than 20% in Greece and in Spain. Especially youth unemployment is really very high in Greece and in Spain, more than 50%. More than a half of the young generation has no perspective. But also in Italy and in Croatia we have an youth unemployment rate of more than 40%. In Cyprus more than 30%, and also in Portugal. The overall youth unemployment rate in the European Union is 21.6%. It's really very high. Although we have very different economic developments in the European countries concerning also the labor market, if looking at the general economic and social situation, the situation is not satisfying, and evidently the results promised by the Troika are not met. The crisis is not over. It is said that it's coming to an end, but that's not the truth. Europe remains in the state of crisis. Sluggish economic growth has caused the loss of millions of jobs, growing private and public debt, increasing inequality in the distribution of income and of wealth. Furthermore, this has led to political tensions and anti-European nationalist movements, and so its development is also politically very dangerous. The austerity policy of the Troika and the focus on a rigid fiscal policy have not solved the crisis, but deepened it even more. The Troika and the majority of the European governments ignore the real reasons of the European crisis. This crisis is not a crisis of public debt, as it said. It's a bank and financial crisis as a consequence of the worldwide financial and economic crisis 2006-2007. It's a systematic rise of capitalist development. Therefore, a radical change of economic policy is required towards a policy facing the real reasons of the crisis. In my opinion, there are three elements which are decisive for an alternative approach to the policy of the Troika. Democratic control of the financial sector, a different distribution policy, and public investment programs for a sustainable growth and for the creation of decent employment. Concerning the financial policy, a radical change is required. According to the Euro Memo Group, it's a group of left-wing economists all over Europe. I think that's very important. The banking sector should be radically transformed, creating units of smaller size, offering financial services on the basis of clearly defined and generally applicable rules. And it's needed an effective policy framework should be created to address the European shadow banking system and its offshore dimension. With regard to the debt issue, Syriza and also the European left request a European-wide debt conference in order to restructure the debt and to find a solution. The reference point is the debt conference of 1953, when the debt of Germany was discussed and it was found a solution for the debt in Germany. I think we have to have now another very similar conference, not only for Greece but for all the countries in Europe, to find a solution concerning the debt. For the most indebted countries like Greece, in my opinion, a debt cut is unavoidable. Effective measures against financial speculation are necessary. Financial speculation, I think that's very clear, has to be prohibited. In particular, the role and the policy of the European Central Bank has to be changed. The European Central Bank should adopt the responsibility for economic development and employment and should function as a lender of last resort. And instead of always pumping more and more money in the financial markets as it happens today, this money should be used for public investments. And I think there's also a need to finance directly the states and not via private banks. A second element of an alternative economic policy regards the distribution policy. Instead of reducing salaries and public expenditure, both should be increased. This would not only be a matter of more social justice, but also stimulate the domestic demand and so would serve to the economic development. In particular, another fiscal policy is required, taxing more the rich and the wealthy. And I think it's time to apply a tax on financial transactions. Since many years we are discussing the so-called Tobin tax, that is to say, a little tax against the speculation with currencies, with financial transaction. It's now time to apply it. And I think we should have also to end the tax dumping that we have in Europe, and then we have to need a progressive tax concerning also corporate profits. The third, in my opinion, the most important element concerns the investment policy. Investment policy is at the heart of any economic policy. A political shift towards investments in infrastructure, Sustainable production and the creation of decent employment is urgently necessary. This requires public investment programs and cannot be entrusted only to the market. Such investment should be integrated in an active industrial policy. After having been neglected for many years, the European Union is now rediscovering the importance of industrial policy. Since 2008, industrial production has declined in Europe. Now, the European Union Commission set its goal to raise manufacturing sector's share in total value creation back to 20% against the present 16%. And we have to take into consideration that the industrial situation is very divergent in Europe. One of the highest shares of industrial activities has Germany with 22%, but the leader is not Germany, it's the Czech Republic with about 25%. But this these shares of Germany and also of Czech Republic are considerably above the average of the European Union of 15%. And this high share in Germany explains, by the way, why Germany was less affected by the European crisis. I think the advantage of the German situation as a strong industrial sector with advanced technology and high productivity and relatively low wages compared with the high productivity, that's a crucial element of Germany's economic success. But on the other hand, the situation in Germany is not so brilliant as it is said, because we have, on the other hand, a huge sector of precarious work. Precarious work, that's to say, low-paid work, insecure, limited contracts, bad working conditions. And we have, I think, the hugest sector of precarious work concerning the European countries. That's the other side of the German situation, and therefore the situation is not so brilliant. And very often Germany is a point of reference, a so-called model for the other countries. That's not possible because German economic success is based on success in exports, and that's not possible for all the countries, and therefore the left, for example, in Germany demands a higher domestic demand, increasing salaries, increasing also social expenditure. And therefore we have really, on the one hand, a quite stable situation, but on the other hand we have some social contradictions. Also concerning the divergence concerning income and wealth, for example. But in the most affected countries by the crisis in the south of Europe, economic and industrial have been reduced considerably. That's one of the main problems. And in these countries, I think industrial policy with comprehensive investment programs are urgently necessary. And when I'm talking about industrial policy, it's not only meant the development of industry, because an industrial sector is also very important to develop services, the good services, the highly developed services, advanced services, and therefore I think industrial sector is required in all the European countries. And the goal of industrial policy is twofold. Industrial and general economic recovery, and an economic development which creates decent employment, good jobs, and corresponds to social and ecological needs. And we have proposals for programs in this direction. The German trade union, for example, the German Trade Union Confederation DGB, has proposed a so-called Marshall Plan for Europe. I don't like very much this word, but anyway, it's titled Marshall Plan for Europe, envisaging a public investment plan worth to 2% of the Europe's gross domestic product per year over a period of 10 years. A further plan in the same direction has been put forward by the European Trade Union Confederation, The European Trade Union Confederation ETOC proposes a so-called new path for Europe, also a plan for investment of an additional 2% of the GDP of the European Union per year, also for a period of 10 years, in order to stimulate a sustainable growth and to create quality jobs. It's intended to initiate a social and ecological transformation process, providing investments in energy transformation, renewable energy, for example, transport network, public transport network, and infrastructure, education and training, expansion also of some technologies like broadband network, social housing, sustainable water management. Recently also the Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, launched a 315 billion euros investment plan, which, however, has not the same quality as the trade union proposals because it's orientated essentially on mobilization of private participation in investment projects, foreseen private-public projects. But nevertheless, these initiatives taken by the President of the European Commission, this initiative shows that there is now a wide consensus about the need for new European investment programs. But as I said it before, the Juncker plan is inadequate and does not correspond to the economic and social risk currently at stake. What is needed is a policy that actively stimulates reindustrialization and a public investment policy that stops and reverses the deterioration of public infrastructure, which is a problem in many countries. Also, for example, in Germany, we have a lot of problems on a community level with infrastructures in consequence of the fiscal compact we have in Germany, and that's a big problem for public investments. A European-wide public investment program of 2% of the gross domestic product of the European Union, orientated on sustainable development and on the creation of good jobs, is an effective alternative to the still dominant neoliberal austerity policy. And if it is focused on the most affected regions by the crisis, it could reduce also the disparities and the huge disparities we have between countries and the regions of Europe. A further and very important issue related to the European crisis is the question of democracy. The decisions taken by the Troika are not democratically legitimized. The austerity policy is not only socially a disaster and economically counterproductive, but also undermines democracy. The rights of the parliaments are reduced, and also rights of trade unions with regard to wage policy are partly suspended. And even the European Parliament is not really involved in the decision-making process. The decisions are taken by the Troika as a technocratic group without any democratic legitimation, and therefore democracy must be at the heart of the politics of the left. An alternative concept of economic policy can't be designed only as a top-down process, but has to be organized also bottom-up. Any left-wing economic concept has to consider the specific conditions of the different countries and has to involve the people and their representatives, not only the parliamentarians, but also trade unions and movements of the civil society. Participatory democracy is essential for politics, alternative to the authoritarian neoliberal policy. Economic or industrial democracy has to be a key issue in the strategy of the European It's an essential element of an alternative economic policy and in building a society of democratic socialism. We have to refer to a tradition which has been unfortunately lost in the last years. It was a financial crisis with its threats for democracy and its demands for democratic control of the financial markets which puts this topic on the political agenda again. Economic democracy, in my understanding, has to be a comprehensive concept which combines different levels. The shop floor, the company, corporate, the regional economy, and the economy as a whole. The question of property, in my opinion, is crucial. A different ownership structure with cooperatives, public and employee ownership is required. Economic or industrial democracy is more than participation, or that what we call in Germany co-determination, because in the concept of industrial democracy, the workers and employees themselves as owners have the right to influence the company policy, the company strategy, the corporate strategy directly. Employees' ownership in the context of economic democracy means the reappropriation of the results of the work by those who work. But the concept of economic democracy is even more far-reaching. It means also the political government of the economic development, which will not be subordinated to the market, but democratically controlled. The democratic control and the democratic organization of the decision-making process in the economy are a big challenge, of course. It would be certainly helpful to refer to the debate about and to the practical experiences of self-management, of workers' councils, as they occurred in the history of labor, socialist and cooperative movements. But I think it's also very interesting and helpful to look at the current approaches of solidarity economics, which emerged in some regions and particularly in Latin America. Thus, I'm convinced we have a good basis for the necessary discussion about such alternatives. Those forms of practical approaches of economic or industrial democracy are essential elements of participatory democracy, going beyond the parliamentary system because they are direct forms of democratic participation. The parliamentary system, however, is a representative system based in particular on the activities of the political parties. Always there have been attempts to complement this representative parliamentary system with elements of more direct participation, like referenda, for example, and often social progress was achieved by decisions in a referendum and not by decisions in the parliament. Today we have a broad discussion to extend those direct forms of democracy also with regard to the new information and communication technologies like internet, which make information easier. On the other hand, they have also some problems related to the new information and communication technology. But anyway, economic or industrial democracy even exceeds these approaches, like referenda, because the producers themselves are also those who make the decisions, or should make the decisions. For the left, parliamentary and extra-parliamentary work are inseparable. It's quite clear that it's very important to be present in the parliaments and to have strong parliamentary groups, but in the end, the success of left-wing politics depends on the existence and the extent of broad social movements, to whose development the left must contribute. To contribute in building right social movements is part of the strategy to achieve a new political and cultural hegemony against the neoliberalism. Neoliberal politics are still dominant in Europe, but it becomes more and more clear that such a policy is not able to face the ongoing European crisis and to resolve it. The victory of Syriza in Greece certainly encourages alternative political approaches, although the situation remains very difficult. What we need is a change of the political climate towards alternatives which are not based on nationalism and exclusion, which is a right-wing political concept, but on solidarity and democratic participation. And therefore, a broad debate about alternatives in economic and social policy is necessary. Thank you very much for your attention.